Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Jeffrey Epstein Show. I'm your host, Bobbycapucci, and this is a morning update. Last night, I had the pleasure of interviewing Jen and Lisa from the Prince and the Pervert podcast. They were on for about 40 minutes, and we discussed a wide range of topics that have to do with Jeffrey Epstein. Everything from what motivated them to start covering the case, all the way up to what they used to do before they were chasing down Jeffrey Epstein's co-conspirators. I'll have that episode ready for you later on this afternoon, early evening. We ran into some technical issues towards the end that I had to go back and edit, so I'll have it all polished up and ready for your consumption late afternoon, early evening, somewhere around then. But it was a great time, and I really appreciate Jen and Lisa for taking the time out of their busy day to hop onto the podcast and introduce themselves to the Jeffrey Epstein Show listeners. All right, so as for our article today, we're going to talk a little bit more about Jes Staley. Now, if you remember, a couple of days ago, there were all these articles coming out how Staley was going to be safe and how Bramson was calling a truce and, everything was well in the Barclays world all of a sudden. Well, I told you guys that was BS right from the jump. Look, Staley is finished, all right? No matter what they say coming out of that boardroom, no matter what sort of spin or line they try and pump, the fact of the matter is this. Staley is a dead man walking, professionally speaking. He has zero chance moving forward to be a productive executive for Barclays. So, at the end of the day, what's the most important thing to a place like Barclays? Money. And if Jes Staley is an impediment to that, and he is standing in the way of them raking in the dough, you better believe that Jes Staley will be getting the axe. So today, we have an article from thisismoney.uk. It's part of the Daily Mail, and the headline is, Corporate Raiders Stalking Barclays Set to Launch Major New Offensive Against Jes Staley Over Bank Boss's Ties to Convicted Pedophile Jeffrey Epstein. This article was written by Helen Cahill. Now, remember what I told you, folks. Remember what I said a while back, that Jes Staley would not make it through the summer. And I'm standing by that. I think that there'll be enough stabilization in the market for Barclays to cut bait and move on from Staley by the end of August. That's my time frame that I'm working with right now. The original article that came out talking about Jes Staley and Barclays and them preparing to find new leadership gave a timeline all the way to 2021. But I believe that timeline has been enhanced. Been very much enhanced, in fact. According to the sources that I've spoken to, the writing is on the wall, folks. It will not be much longer before Jes Staley is looking for a new job. The corporate raider stalking Barclays is set to launch a major new offensive against Jes Staley over the bank boss's ties to convicted pedophile Jeffrey Epstein. The Mail on Sunday can reveal that Edward Bramson, the New York financier who owns 5.5% of Barclays, has hired an influential advisory firm to canvass opposition to Staley ahead of next month's annual meeting. Now remember, the article we just read said that Bramson was calling a truce, Bramson wasn't going to go after him, etc., etc. Well, I told you that was incorrect. I said that, if anything, the only reason there would be even talk of a truce is for stabilization purposes, but it seems to me that Bramson has said to hell with it, and he's going hard here. Lobbying firm Georgeson, hired by Rupert Murdoch in the takeover battle for Sky, has started asking Barclays investors whether they will support Staley's re-election. Bramson has called on shareholders to withhold their support for Staley as chief executive when they start voting on his re-election to the board on Monday. So this is accelerating even quicker than I thought. If Bramson can get enough people on board with this, we could see a serious shakeup even before the end of the summer. We could really see them, if they're really looking to make a change, they could throw caution to the wind and remove Staley in the middle of all of this turmoil and just pin it on the coronavirus. Now, I don't really think that's going to happen. I think they'll wait a little bit to see if things keep stabilizing and the stock market gets to a bit of a normal place, and then you will see how quickly they act. But they might accelerate that. I'm not privy to what is going on in the boardroom. All I have are some sources that know of the situation, right? So I don't have any special boardroom information that I'm making pretend to share with you. I just have some insiders that I know that happen to work on Wall Street. He said investors should not compromise their moral standards after it emerged that Staley maintained ties with Epstein 7 years after the influential financier, pedophile, was convicted of soliciting a child for prostitution. A child cannot be a prostitute. Sources said many of Barclays' top shareholders have so far failed to express any opinion on how the episode reflects on Staley. Investors appeared keener to discuss a climate change agenda from pressure group Share Action. Of course they would, because they feel like that'll get some traction, right? That's something that they can sink their teeth in, and they can tell their investors and people on the outside as they're virtue signaling, look, we care about the environment. Hey, we're environmentalists over here. Meanwhile, their head honcho was busy palling around and cavorting with Jeffrey Epstein 7 years after he was convicted of being a pedophile. Talk about having your whole entire your whole entire agenda backwards, right? I mean, don't get me wrong, climate change is an important topic, something that everybody should be aware of, especially these mega corporations and these big banks. But let's be honest here, okay? Jes Staley's ties to Jeffrey Epstein should have precluded him from ever being in the position he's in the first place. How he got this position is beyond me. Last week it emerged that Bramson had stopped short of calling for Staley's complete removal due to fears it could destabilize the bank in the middle of the coronavirus crisis. And exactly what I told you. That's exactly the reason why Bramson would put the brakes on this hostile takeover. That's the exact reason why he would try to not make waves. But obviously something else is going on, something else, some information perhaps that Bramson and Sherborne have come into possession of, or whatever it may be, but it looks like Bramson is again looking to accelerate the timeline here. But the MOS understands he is to continue his campaign for Staley's eventual removal. Staley came to know Epstein well while acting as his private banker at J.P. Morgan between 2000 and 2013. He visited Epstein during his 13-month jail sentence in 2008 and again in 2015 on a boat trip with his wife to Epstein's private Caribbean retreat, later dubbed Pedo Island. Look, how can you justify this if you're Jes Staley? How can you justify palling around with Jeffrey Epstein, visiting him in jail, going to his island with your wife? How can you even attempt to distance yourself from that relationship and say it was just of a professional nature? You're an absolute liar, Jes Staley. You and him were super close when shit was great for Epstein and you were at J.P. Morgan. How many of those deals did you sign off on that ended up being money that was laundered? That's my question. Can we get a forensic accountant, please, to chase all of this down? All of the money through J.P. Morgan? All of the money that Jeffrey Epstein ever borrowed? Can we get an idea of where it went? All of these donations he made? Well, was that money that he made legally, or was it money that was laundered? These are questions that nobody's asking, and it makes me mental. The money angle of this case is a definite vehicle for a way to bring these people down. Look, do you really think the government wanted to charge Al Capone with tax evasion crimes as opposed to murder and all the other heinous shit he was involved with? Of course not. But at the end of the day, whatever we can do to get these people behind bars, that's what we have to do. Regulators have now launched a probe into whether Staley and Barclays have been truthful in their disclosure about the extent of his relationship with Epstein, who killed himself, allegedly, last year in a New York jail. Of course he wasn't honest, and of course Barclays is going to cover for him, and of course JP Morgan is going to send over the emails that are requested. How many of the emails did they dump? How many emails were destroyed? How many hard drives were destroyed? What, these people are above that? These people are above committing these sorts of crimes to keep themselves out of the spotlight, to keep themselves out of trouble? Yeah, okay. There is no suggestion of any wrongdoing by Staley, But Bramson said the scandal showed a serious lack of judgment from Staley. Yeah, no suggestion of any wrongdoing as far as being involved in abusing girls, but what about the financial side? Nobody knows if there's any financial discrepancies here. How much money changed hands between Epstein and Staley? How much of it was on the up and up? How much of it was done to protect Epstein's finances? Were any of these money deposits done to accounts offshore or to Epstein's banks? You see, these are all questions that nobody has answers to because the federal government, Maureen Comey and Jeffrey Berman, they're all dragging their feet. Get busy, folks. Sherborne investors said if Barclays were listed in the U.S., Staley would not have lasted 2 minutes when these revelations came to light. The chief executive of a British bank is discovered to have been actively associated with and supported a convicted child sex trafficker, and the board's response to endorse him unanimously. This needs to come to an end. What I will say about America, at the very least, if you have any sort of stink on you about Jeffrey Epstein like this, there is zero chance that you're not going to be thrown to the wolves at this point. Nobody would be in a position like Staley, especially in a bank in America with those sorts of ties to Epstein. You saw what happened to Acosta, you saw what happened to Dubin, you saw what happened to Wexner, and the same should be happening to Staley, but for some reason, and obviously the main excuse is the coronavirus, but for some reason, the board at Barclays have seemed to publicly stand behind Staley, while at the same time, whispers out of that same boardroom are talking about getting rid of him. So they're passing a mixed message out of that boardroom, and it's pretty common for that to happen. When a hostile takeover is imminent or when one is underway, you'll hear all sorts of conflicting comments coming from the boardroom being leaked, etc., etc. So really all we can do is actually follow what's going on with Staley. The words out of the boardroom, that's fine and it's whatever, but we can't really trust what they have to say at this point. All we can do is keep following these sorts of articles here where they write them and they have you read between the lines, basically. So what's going on is the board is showing their public face that they have confidence in Staley. Meanwhile, when the doors are closed, there's a whole different sentiment coming from that boardroom. We are not voting for Staley. On what grounds could any shareholder justify voting for an individual who had a decades-long professional relationship with a notorious convicted pedophile and sex offender? Yeah, hey, look, that's not a bad, it's a good question, all right? That is definitely a good question, and, Barclays should answer that question. Why would they want their boss being a guy with that sort of relationship? You're telling me there's nobody else in the financial community, there's nobody else in your company that can come in and do that job correctly without the stink of Jeffrey Epstein all over them? So just remember, folks, when you hear that Jes Staley is safe at Barclays, what you're hearing is BS. Staley is not safe at Barclays. He is on his way out the door, and as I've said from the beginning when this all started to break, I would expect him to be gone no later than August at this point. All right, everybody, if you'd like to contact me, you can do that at bobbycapucci@protonmail.com. That's BOBBYCAPUCCI@protonmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter at BOBBY_CAPUCCI. All right, folks, I will be back later on with some more content for you. I hope you all enjoy your Sunday.